components. I tried to make it fun. Writing declarative React. That's what it's called, a styled component story. I'm not that good at writing. That's probably the most entertaining part of the writing. But nonetheless, I hope you enjoy it. So this is me. I guess you can't see my face now. That's my face up on the screen. There's my Twitter handle, GitHub handle. I work at a small company in Ottawa called MB3. We just sell some software to the United States government doing emergency management. In case you're wondering, feel free to come and ask questions. I think our whole dev team is here supporting my first talk. That's what. Yeah, so get right into it. Has anyone seen a styled components talk before? And I'm talking like on YouTube, or you've seen like some slides of one. That's one person, 2, 3. That's actually surprisingly a lot less than I would have expected. Who's heard the styled components? More people, that's good. The same people who have seen the talks, that's good. You took something out of them. Wonderful. Anyone used styled components here? This side of the room, you're doing well. Still not, okay. How many of you have used styled components but haven't seen a talk on styled components? That one was just out of curiosity, I wasn't planning that. Yeah. Okay, interesting. So there's some of you who actually haven't seen a talk on them. Oh, wow. The weird thing is I want to have a conversation with them. I'm curious about why you picked them in the first place, but moving on. So in case you don't know what they are, styled components are a CSS and JS library in the truest sense of the word, meaning that you're actually just writing CSS in JavaScript files. So there's a bit of JavaScript in there, but in general, in string literals, you're just writing CSS, which is lovely. For me, coming out of writing pure CSS always, there's some Sass. It was an easy transition. Anyway, not here to talk about that. What we are here to talk about is how writing styled components actually makes your React better. I wrote reason aboutable type thing. I want you to be able to look at a function, look at a render, and say, I know exactly how that's working. And I feel like that styled components gives that to you. Now, are we not talking about here? A few more things that I actually am talking about. But why in the first place would you use CSS and JS? Not going to cover it. You do what you do, and yep, stay out of that debate. Any other CSS to JS library, so styled components is not the only one. Obviously, there's a few more. Not going to bring that up either, and not going to compare the other libraries together. And the last part is I'm not going to teach you how to write styled components. That's also not why I'm here. The doc site is lovely. You can go and read that. Good. Perfect. So what is the problem? I'm here presenting to you about styled components. Obviously, there's a problem. No, there's no problem for them. There is a problem. And the problem is this. This is some beautiful code that I wrote using React. Can anyone tell me what that code does? I'm being a bit silly. I put like variable names of A, B, and C, right? I'm being a bit silly, but you can see why. No one. Hazard a guess? No one? A list. There is a list in there. That's good. Anybody? No? Good. Oh, this is perfect. This is going really well. I planned this out. I thought about it. So what is this? That doesn't it doesn't tell you anything, right? That's a calendar. Can you? Woo! A calendar? What are you talking about? This like X, Y. There's ULs in there, some divs, right? I hope you're all starting to see the actual problem here, and that is that HTML is imperative, right? You have to look at them, and the semantics drive the understanding of what's happening in code. So that's a bit of a problem, considering React, right? We now have encapsulated components and that kind of stuff for writing nice things. What's the solution to writing render functions that don't look like that? It's declarative programming. So declarative programming, in case you don't know what it is, there's a definition you can pause and read from Wikipedia, in case you're wondering. But pretty much all it is stop making assumptions. You want to look at the code and not assume anything about it, but actually just read it and understand it. And this is where I feel like styled components brings a lot of value into your code. So let's take that other example and let's change the day in that calendar. Maybe we want to add a bit of extra styles onto it. It's easy. No problem. Changing the day? No problem. I want to do color. I know the CSS to do that. Where are the days? Anybody? Which part of that is the days?
The Y with the LI?
There we go, okay. So there's a bit of context in the fact that it's calendar, and you can be like, well, I'm not looping through the months, right? So it has to be the middle part to do that. But if you didn't know, you're guessing, right? You're being like, it doesn't written right there. This is the day. You have to edit this component. You're guessing. It's probably the LI because that's in a loop, and with a loop over the days. Now, you're asking me, I didn't have CSS in any of those. Doesn't CSS solve that problem? And I think it does. Yeah, CSS definitely solves that problem. Especially with things like BEM. Anybody here heard of BEM? Good, okay, probably the same people who have seen styles and moments. This is good. I'm wondering if people just aren't putting their hands up. They're like, oh yes, what are you talking about? Of course I've seen BEM. In case you don't know what it is, this is BEM. This is another thing where I'd like to walk and talk, but I'll try and stand by the mic. You can see the top class name says calendar. So that's adding already some context to that component. It's not just divs. It actually gives you, this is a calendar. And we can see we have a calendar header, day of the week and a month, right? So that's already adding some value to the piece of code, that it's not just, here's a section, here's an LI, and I'm making assumptions about those tags. We actually have some context in the class names. Now, I'll go through a bit of what BEM is. BEM stands for block element modifier. And if you can see the arrows, the block is the topmost element, kind of a containing one, almost as if you have like the component and you have like a div just wrapping it, because before React 16, I guess that's the case. But yeah, so that would be the block. Inside of that, everything kind of breaks off of it, so that we can kind of do these. I don't want to have collisions in my code, in my CSS code, because that's how CSS works so lovely. So we have the block at the top, elements denoting the other elements, obviously, in that block. And then the modifier, which I couldn't fit on the page, so I put it at the bottom. But it's kind of like a smaller bit, so you have like a component like an arrow. Maybe you just want to change some styles, so maybe before or after. If you're like hovering over something, maybe you have an active hover element, that might be a modifier for that component. So that's not bad, right? We can already tell that probably if I come into a render function that looks like this, I can tell right away without having to look at the actual output on the DOM that that's a calendar, mostly because it says the word calendar in it. That's extremely helpful. But nonetheless, we introduced a few new problems. Obviously, CSS isn't perfect, especially in this world now of React and bundles and whatnot. We're still looking at namespacing conflicts. Anybody here love Webpack? Okay. Who loves configuring Webpack is the second question. If you put your hand up, who loves Webpack? Good, no one. I don't. Maybe you do, maybe that's your thing, that's great. I'm not a big fan of configuring Webpack, it's a bit too much. Somebody else does that, or you do it once and never again. So there's that. That's, to me, a negative of doing that. You have conventions, right? So BEM is great, which we just showed you, but that's an enforceable convention, right? You have to be like, hey, everybody, get together in my 300-person team and make sure you follow BEM. Hopefully we catch it in PR, right? But in that case, right, like we just can't, some things will slip through. Maybe someone gets a bit lazy, class name B, it's fine, it'll get through. The last part, which I think really speaks to React's wonderfulness, where it could be really useful, but with something like BEM, just pure CSS, lacks a bit, and I put a sad face, cry face next to it, which is conditional classes, right? So let's take a break and try and change the calendar with BEM before we head into conditional classes. So here it is again. It's not so bad. I know exactly what the day is because calendar day is right there. No problem. I'm not guessing which element it is now. I know it's the LI because it has day in it. I added a conditional there through a ternary just saying, if the day is in the month, then you want to add another class to it. And you can see I used a modifier there. So just output this extra string saying calendar in month. Otherwise, it's not in the month, just empty string, so you have one class name. And they're pretty simple. It works out. I'm doing the things I want to do. I can look at the code and understand what pieces of HTML are doing what. Now, what if we add one more conditional, or a few more conditionals in there, right? Because we're not just adding one. We're not just being like, yes, it's in the month. We're also saying, is it my birthday? Or, is it a holiday? Is it garbage day? Those kind of things that you want to see in the calendar. Maybe they highlight different colors. That's beautiful. I mean, that's the most beautiful code I've ever seen. Mostly because I wrote it, even if it's bad. So, obviously, I'm trying to make a point you're probably not writing that inline, maybe you are. You're probably not writing that inline in CSS. There's packages that handle things nicely like that. But nonetheless, you're adding a lot more like just things into the code that take away from the actual structure, what's happening in the rest of the code in there. And I'm only adding class names like that onto one portion of that code, but can you imagine every other element in there as well having more than one class name, which is really likely, I would think, from writing CSS a little while. Not very many elements have only one class on them, right? So that code that's gone down from like this tiny bit that just outputs calendar to this huge thing because you got tons of logic in there, which is the benefit of React. So the question really is that declarative code? I mean, it looks nice, right? And you can tell there's context. You can kind of read through it and understand what that code is doing, but is it really declarative? I think I put the slide, yeah, okay. My answer is no. These things still don't mean anything to us, right? As much as we want to think that we're like computers and that we can look at code and be like, yes, I can understand exactly what that does. Granted, HTML is pretty simple, but section, span, UL, they have no context. They're not telling you anything about that specific component more than they're telling you anything about the entire language of HTML, right? It's not very useful to someone coming in and being like, okay, how do I edit this or change this, and how do I make it work in a way that's going to like, you know, make our code better and readable and that kind of stuff. So what does declarative code look like? Anyone guess where I'm going with that? No? Okay. There. No applause now? I stood up and you applauded. So this is declarative code. You have no doubt as to what is happening, what each of these elements are for. You have a calendar. I didn't even show you the picture of the calendar and you knew it's a calendar. That's called calendar. You have a header of the calendar, a day of the week, of the month, the list of days, which someone so handily pointed out last time, and even the day. Like, it's all right there. I don't have to guess. I can just stop the presentation now, we're done. Because, whew, that's just style components. All of that is written. I didn't make that up and be like, this is the ideal situation. I'm actually writing those with style components. Now, we obviously write React. I say the dev team I work with. And it was actually a huge win for us to switch. So we started off with BEM. We started off with doing conventions and using Sass, compiling down our Webpack. So I'm not just speaking like that would probably be a problem. I feel like we had that problem. And we solved it. We recently had a few new people start, and they just came into the code and can contribute like right away, without context of someone sitting beside them and being like, this is what this element's doing, that one's what that one's doing. Especially in a world now where people are writing less and less, you know, straight up HTML. You're maybe losing a bit of the semantics and why you would write a button instead of just a div, maybe, you know, a span in there, which you can make buttons out of now with the languages we use, right? So it was a huge win for our team, right? They can make independent changes and inform changes without having to sit beside someone who's been in the code a while and make changes. So let's do the same thing we've been trying to do with the other situations, which is let's make a change to the day using style components. So there's a day. You could have all figured that out. I didn't have to stand up here and speak it to you. It's literally written day. So it's perfect. Now we can just add that in. I just added a prop, is in month. Same function I was calling before. It just tells it, you know, if the day's in the month. And bam, that just works. Now can you see how declarative it is? It's beautiful. It's written right there. You have no questions. Bam. Now, this is the style component for it. This is the only time I'm going to show you style components. I can tell you how to write them. But this is the code. It's just CSS. I've done no magic in there. I've done none of this like, oh, I got to compress those things into objects, which means I got to do camel casing. No, I could just copy and paste my old CSS that I've written, which is wonderful. Put that right in to my new CSS, which is wonderful. And it works all beautifully. Now, if you have questions about some of the other fancy stuff that's happening in there that allows style components to be so flexible, I'd love to talk about it afterwards. But for now, it doesn't bring any value to the conversation. So even adding more than one, right? Before you saw that exploded the code for that one element, but because they're just props now, it makes the code still readable, still declarative, without actually adding any extra things into that element. So you can read exactly, making sure that in the day you possibly have it, you know, a month, you possibly have it a holiday, a vacation day, those kind of things, and that's the code that goes in there. obfuscating a little bit, as you can tell. Just take a note as well, I haven't changed A, B, X, Y, right? And those become way less important when it comes to writing React now, because it's not the variables, even though it is, and you would name them nice things like month and that kind of thing, that are driving the understanding of that code. It's actually now your HTML. Your HTML is telling you exactly, HTML, the React, the style components are telling you exactly what's happening in that code. Now, this could be inflammatory, but I think CSS is actually pretty good. I think that we've been running it for a long time. There's been a lot of work put into it to actually make it, reasonable and able to write nice things, which is, I guess, why, and hopefully, I guess, why that people start using it for mobile now and writing desktops, apps in it, because it does a good job. So why are we trying to move away from it? We should just stick with it. And style components does that in such a good way. Plus, it gives us a whole bunch of bonuses. These are just the top 3 that I picked. It does auto CSS prefixing, Webpack config. No smiles. It does, a bit of obviously, here's a bit of Webpack config, but it does a bit of code splitting, right? If you aren't rendering an element on the page, there's no reason to send the CSS along with it, right? It's not being used. Style components can do that, right? It makes that smart choice for you, and you can use them in React Native. So you're kind of just already bringing a lot of value into your code, both in web apps and wherever you write React, but also, well, React Native, which is nice. Good, so we took this lovely piece of code, which no one understood, not even me, and we brought it to be this, which tells you exactly what's happening on the page. Thank you, that's it.